the great tzaddik called the Rizhiner, a very big tzaddik called the Rizhiner, says the following. It says there's two ways to get close to Hashem. And it's learnt out from the letters of Hashem's name. One of the key letters of Hashem's name are the Yud and the Hey, and the Vav and the Hey, which he writes can be found in the famous verse, Yismechu Hashamayim v'sogei la'oretz, the beginning of the letters of those words correspond for the Yud and the Hey and the Vav and the Hey. He explains the following, that when you have one way to get close to Hashem was called connecting to Hashem through the hidden world. And the hidden world, says the Rizhiner, can be found through the Yud and the Hey. And he says words in Hebrew, such as Achila, eating, that's the Yud and the Hey, Shasiyah, drinking, Halicha, walking, Biyah, marital relations, and I'm going to add in now Bechira, free will, Yud and the Hey. That's one way to get very close to Hashem through the hidden world. But then he says the Vav and the Hey is when it's overt, when there's a revelation of Hashem, when you're going to the highest level without having to go through underground. And the Vav and the Hey can be found in the word Torah, which is Vav and the Hey in Torah, or menorah, or oira. There are certain words with the Vav and the Hey where it's just explicit and revealed that connection. So with that, the Bechira, we're going to be discussing free will, which is one of the key ways to get close to Hashem. It's one of the purposes of why Hashem has made the world. Rabbi Tatz has got an amazing book. Rabbi Tatz, have you got your book there that we can quickly, we can show? So if you're interested in Torah or Rabbi Tatz or this book, Free Will, I highly recommend it. I've read it a few times and we're super blessed to have Rabbi Tatz joining us tonight. And then please God, we're going to do a part 2 of Free Will with Hashem's help next month as well. So without further ado, everybody please give a Zoom welcome to Rabbi Dr. Akiva Tatz. I'm going to go on mute now.
Thank you very much indeed, Rabbi Hill. Can people hear me? Just give me some sort of a wave or... Okay, so first of all, the very first point is if you can display yourself on the Zoom, I find it much easier to talk to people than to black boxes. Now, I fully understand if you haven't curled your eyelashes suitably, then okay, but otherwise, if you don't mind, it is just reassuring to see that people are not falling asleep or feeding the dog, while I'm talking. So that's a help. Of course, if you're going to fall asleep or feed the dog, then I'd prefer you to, I'd rather see a black screen. Thank you to Rabbi Hill for this invitation to study about free will together. It's an honor to be part of Rabbi Hill's program. I'm sure you all know that Rabbi Hill is a leading personality in Jewish teaching and outreach. I cannot give him all the credit because I think part of it is the fact that his father was a wonderful teacher, set him on this path. I had the honor of learning from him many things. And so it's a great pleasure, personal pleasure, to be able to participate in this series. Let's think about free will. And let me ask you to hold the questions at first, if you don't mind, just to give me a chance to build this subject. You're welcome to put something in the chat box. If I don't see it, please forgive me and ask me at the end. Or please feel free to email me. Rabbi Hill, I'm sure, will give you my email address with the greatest of pleasure. An easy email to reach me on is tatzmed@gmail.com, tatzmed. And if I don't have time to answer your question while we're talking, please feel free to be in touch and I'll do my best to give you a response if I can on via the email. And finally, if you want a reference on this subject, as you saw, I've published a book in English which deals with many of the parameters and areas of free will. And for those of you whose Hebrew is good enough, that book is available in Hebrew, which prints out all the original sources as well. So you can actually learn through the classic sources in Judaism about free will. Free will covers many topics. I'm not going to discuss tonight. I will not discuss the question of foreknowledge and free will. That's a very wonderful and mysterious, deep subject. As Rabbi Hill kindly offered to invite me again, I'm happy to do that on another occasion. And there are many other divisions of the subject, right, which are perplexing and need to be discussed. What I'd like to discuss in this session is the broad approach, if you like, broad brushstrokes approach to what free will means in Judaism. And it's very important to get this foundation solid in order to understand everything else. Are we together so far? Everyone? Yes, no, everyone? Okay. Stay with me carefully. First of all, you need to know that of all the axioms on which Judaism is built, free will is probably the most basic. Let me put it to you this way. The reason that God created the world in the first place was to create beings who are independent and can choose, make moral choices on their own. I'll tell you one beautiful way to say this. The Torah says in the beginning of the creation that the human being was created b'tselem Elokim. Tselem Elokim means in the divine image. And the question is, what does it mean that you're created in a divine image? It means you look like God? What does that mean? Our deepest sources tell us that divine image means that you have free will. You look like God because he's free and you are free. And that's what's unique about you. No other part of the universe has free will. Not creatures above you like angels and not creatures beneath you like animals. The only aspect of the creation that has free will is the human being. Angels, for example, have no free will because they see too clearly. An angel sees that it would disobey its spiritual destiny, would disappear immediately. An angel has the sort of free will that you have to step into a fire. Do you have free will to walk into a fire? Yes. Would you do it? No. You see the consequences so clearly that you wouldn't do it. Do you have free will to jump off a tall building? Sure. But you see yourself becoming part of the scenery, so clearly that you wouldn't do it. And therefore, an angel sees the spiritual world so clearly that there's no way that he could make a wrong choice. Animals don't see enough. Animals see only the immediate material need. They're not high enough to make sophisticated, balanced choices, and therefore animals have no free will either. Here comes the principle. Listen carefully to this. The reason that the human being is unique is because we are uniquely pitched at the interface between a spiritual world above us and an animal world beneath us. At that exact point on the scale of spirituality, free will operates. If you're any higher than a human being, you'd be an angel, you'd have no free will. If you're any lower than a human being, you'd be an animal, and all you could think about is where you're going to sleep tonight or which, smelly bone you're going to chew. That is unique about the human being. We have an exact midpoint. We feel the pull towards the angelic and the noble and the spiritual, and we feel the tension, the pull between the spiritual and the elevated, and we feel the pull towards the animal and the material. Not you. Any of Rabbi Hill's students I know, they've got no animal or sensual pull. I'm talking about normal human beings, okay? So normal human beings feel a pull in two directions, uniquely because we are positioned between a spiritual world above us and an animal world beneath. And that's exactly why the human being has two components, a spiritual being inwardly called a soul, and an external animal being called a body. And that's why they pull in two directions, and that's why you feel free will tension. Are we together, ladies, gentlemen? So far, so good? Okay. Now, that means that the human being has a narrow zone between a spiritual and a material. However, that zone, if you put the microscope on it, you'll see it has thickness. At the lower part of that realm is where you're very tempted to the vulgar and the coarse and the animal. At the top of that zone is where you're very powerfully pulled towards the spiritual. And depending where you are on that spectrum defines who you are as a human being. And you can move up and down. You can be at a point of free will where your ordeals are very vulgar and crude. You can be at a point of free will where your free will choice is very refined. And the worst option there is very good. And it's that zone that we call the spectrum of the point of free will. And I'd like to explain that clearly. But before I do that, let me tell you this. This thing that we call free will, that narrow zone that we're talking about today, it has a, I would say, horizontal expression and a vertical expression. When I say horizontal, I mean, look across all the areas of your life, your marital situation, all your relationships, your academic achievements, your financial situation, your health. When you look at all these areas of your life, it's a basic teaching in Judaism that you are free in only one of those areas. There's only one area of your life that you have free will in. Okay? What is that? Well, let's ask a question. Are you free financially to make more or to earn less? It's basic in Jewish thinking that you're not free in that area. Now, you realize immediately the world gets this wrong. The world thinks if you work hard, you earn a lot of money. If you don't, you don't. Ironically, The world thinks that you are free when it comes to your finances, and when it comes to your morality, you're not free. You were created a certain way. In Judaism, it's exactly the opposite. You are free morally, and you're not free financially. You know what people do? When they make a lot of money, they say, well, I worked very hard. I was very smart. I made good decisions. When they commit a sin, they say, God created me that way. It's not my fault. No, it's exactly the other way around. When you sin, that's your fault. When you make a lot of money, that's God's fault. Okay, so you need to know where to attribute. So we say like this: on the first day of Rosh Hashanah every year is predetermined how much money you will make that year. The first day of Rosh Hashanah, the beginning of the Jewish year, God decides how much money you're going to get that year, and nothing you do can change that. Or shall I say, you can damage yourself financially. Absolutely, that's an immoral thing to do. It's an irresponsible thing to do, and you can absolutely ruin yourself financially. But you cannot guarantee wealth. You can guarantee poverty and financial disaster, but you cannot guarantee wealth. You cannot earn 1 penny more than God has decided for you. Okay? Now, if you look around the world, I think you see this very clearly. You see lots of people who are very clever, highly educated, make all the right decisions, never earn any money, and others who are totally idiots and very rich. I happen to know a few, I can assure you, and I think Rabbi Hill knows one or two as well. The fact that a person is rich has got nothing to do, or very little to do, with his intelligence. You know, I never forget, I saw an interview with a Canadian Jew who's a multi-billionaire, right? His name is Mr. Bronfman. He's a very, very, very wealthy Canadian Jew. So the interviewer said to Mr. Bronfman, how did you get so wealthy? He said, when I was 4 years old, I bought an apple for 1 cent, and then I sold it for 2 cents. Then I bought 2 apples and I sold them for 4 cents. Then I bought a box of apples and I sold it for $1. Then my grandfather died and left me $61 million. And that's how I got rich. Now, Mr. Bronfman has got his head straight. That's exactly the story. You made your effort, but the money came from someplace else. And therefore, we do not assert that free will applies. I'm giving you very broad outlines. Okay, there's a lot more complexity here, but I'm giving you a very broad approach. Let's talk about health. I happen to be a doctor, but you don't need to be a doctor to know that you can make all the right health moves and become disastrously ill. Happens all the time. Happens all the time. You can diet and exercise and do everything. You get some disastrous problem that is nothing to do with your free will. Now, you can destroy your health. Absolutely. Absolutely. You can smoke. You can be overweight. You can absolutely destroy your health. That's a moral issue. It's irresponsible. It's against the Torah. And therefore, God does not interfere when you want to destroy your health. But you cannot guarantee good health. It's out of your free will. What about marriage? How much free will do you have? Of course, if you're married, you'll know you have no free will. That's a well-known. But but let's say in your choice to marry, how much free will do you have? A young man cannot possibly explore a relationship with every woman on earth, even though I've met many young men who've tried very hard. But be that as it may, the options that are presented to you are very limited. That's up to God. Hashem presents you with your marital options, and it's up to you to take the correct one and run with it. But the rest is out of your hands. And therefore, whatever area you're looking at, academically, let's say, you may be gifted academically, you may struggle academically, don't have choice about that. When we talk about free will in Judaism, it's very important to know we're talking about moral choices, about ethical choices, the choice between right and wrong, the choice between the spiritual, elevated, noble, refined, and the animalistic, selfish, egotistical child and lower self. The choice of free will we talk about in Judaism is the battle between the higher self and the lower self. We're not talking about the choice to be rich or poor. And we're not talking about which pair of socks you're going to wear in the morning. It's true that you make that choice, but it's irrelevant choice in terms of your morality. Or when you choose chocolate or vanilla, for your dessert, that's not a moral choice. Maybe choosing an extra dessert over one less is a moral choice, where there's self-control involved. But we are talking here about the choice to be good or bad. And my friends, the reason you were created is to be good. You were not created to be rich. You were not created to be healthy. You were not created for that. You were created to use all of those areas of your life to be good and not be bad. And the tragedy is we live in a world where that's not taught. What's taught in our world is that you're here to be a supreme athlete or to be incredibly rich or powerful. That's what you're not taught that you're here to be good. And Jewish agenda is you're in the world to be good and not bad. All the rest is a tool. Okay, are we clear about this? Can we move on? Okay, now let's move to the next step. Let's look at the vertical plane. And here we come to an idea that is absolutely fundamental to Jewish thinking. What I'm going to share with you now is the most classic idea in this field of Jewish thinking, and possibly the most classic idea in all of Jewish philosophical, emotional, psychic thinking. And that is a notion called Nekudat HaBechira. My friends, pay close attention, please, because on this your life depends. There's a vertical scale. Remember we said there's a zone of free will, and in that zone is a vertical scale. That scale is the scale of free will. Let me explain what I mean. At any point in your life, you're engaging your dark side at a particular point of ordeal. And your challenge is to overcome it at that point. Below that point is no challenge. Below that point of engagement, things are so vulgar and so crude and so childish and immature, you would never get them wrong. And therefore, you have very little free choice in that area. And above your point of freedom, things are so difficult and so refined and so elevated, you probably won't get them right. And you're not held accountable for that because that's not where you're operating. Let me give an example to make this graphic. Let's take an ordeal like stealing. The Talmud says that every day, we're generally speaking challenged in two constant areas. One is the male-female interaction temptation, and one is the stealing temptation, to get away with something that doesn't strictly belong to you, take advantage in some way. Let's talk about that. Stealing operates on a vertical scale. Let's look at the bottom of the scale for a moment. What's on the bottom of the scale is a young fellow hanging out in the street, violently mugging little old ladies. Takes a brick, hits them on the head, runs away with their money. That's his point of freedom when it comes to stealing. Where's his free will expressed? Rav Dessler, one of the great and famous teachers of this area who writes about this extensively, he says this, listen carefully. He says, when that young man attacks a little old lady, and he decides that instead of killing her, he's only going to crack her skull, he has made a tremendous moral advance. When he dies, he's going to be rewarded for that. You think that's ridiculous, but my friend, that's where he's operating. Why he's operating there, we need to talk about, but that's where he's operating. And if he commits one less murder, he's made a tremendous moral advance. You, all of you on this webinar, when you die and you get up to the next world, and God says, Dahlia, Mary, what did you achieve in life? And you say, Hashem, I never smashed any little old ladies over the head with a brick. You think Hashem's going to say, Shkeach, amazing? No, it's not your problem. Now, I don't know Mary or Dahlia, so I don't know what they're doing on a dark night when I'm not looking. But I doubt they're hanging out in the street, hitting little old ladies over the head, because it's not your problem, but it is his problem. And therefore, you are judged only at your area of problem. And when you tell me, I'm a very moral person, I never smashed in a little old ladies over the head, no, it's irrelevant to you. You get no reward for that because it's not your problem. Is this point clear? Let's go up the scale a little bit. Let's say you would never hit a little old lady over the head. You'd be sick at the thought you never could do it. But you work in an office, okay? You work in an office. Please raise your hand if you've ever worked for anyone else. Worked in an office, worked for somebody. Okay, you're sitting there working and you make a phone call, you call your mother. 2 counts of theft against you. Number 1, your employer pays for the call. Number 2, while you speak to your mother for 10 minutes, you're being paid a salary. That's theft, my friends. It may not be the same as climbing into somebody's house at night with a black mask and a crowbar, but it's theft. And you're held as accountable for that as the person who robs a house at night, because at your level of refinement, that is called theft. Now, if you live in a city where it's generally accepted that you Dahlia, you can pay it back, you can work overtime, you can occasionally make phone calls, cool. But what happens if it's a long distance call or you spend half an hour on the phone? That's theft. If you come late to work or you leave early or you take a long coffee break or you don't work as hard as you're supposed to, you're a thief. Now, that might not sound so pleasant, but that's what it is. And at your level of moral challenge, you are guilty. You're as guilty as the man mugging people on the street who's dealing with his problem. And you get no credit for passing his test. And my friends, he gets no punishment for failing in your test because it's above his level. Let's go higher. You never make a private phone call at work. You're much too moral for that. Do you know there's a thing called Gnevat Da'at? You know what that means? Theft of the mind. Which means if you mislead someone, you say something that's a little bit untrue. No harm done, You never hurt anybody's feelings. You never made, and no one suffered in any way. But it's dishonest. It's called theft of the mind, and it's 100% theft in Torah law. You visit someone in hospital, and as you leave the hospital, you see someone else who's ill that you never knew was there. You walk into the room and you say to them, I came specially to visit you. You're lying through your teeth. Now you did a mitzvah as well. That's a different discussion. But meantime, the misleading, by the way, the halacha is that if you walk into a person's room and before you open your mouth, they say, gee, thanks for coming to visit me. You don't have to upset them and say no, but you may not mislead them. And therefore, that's called Gneva Dat. And if you're operating on a level of spiritual refinement, if you do a thing like that, you're guilty of theft. Now, you may think, gee, that's such a subtle problem. If you are operating on a spiritual level and you do that, you're as guilty as the man stealing from people's pockets on the street, because that's where you're operating. And you're only judged. Dahlia, I said that it could be a mitzvah as well, right? Did you hear that? It could be as well. Okay, so I'm not getting into that. I'm talking about us later. Rabbi Hill, am I allowed to set a question for homework for our students? Okay, here comes a challenge for homework. And for every correct answer, Rabbi Hill's going to buy you a whiskey. Or whatever you're into. I don't know what Rabbi Hill students are into these days, but here's the challenge. Not long ago, a man walked into a bank in New York, and he went to the manager and he said to him, I want a bank loan. The manager said, yeah, we do loans. How much do you want? The guy said, I want $200. I'm going abroad for 3 months. I want $200. The manager said, are you serious? That's a tiny loan. You're going to pay 20% interest. I mean, are you for real? He said, look, you advertise loans. So the manager thought, well, listen, I better do it. So he started filling out the forms about the guy's details. And when he said to him, listen, we require collateral. We need security for the loan. The guy said, look, my car's in your parking lot. Here are the keys. And my car's worth a lot more than $200. I'm going abroad for 3 months. When I come back, if I do not pay the loan, you sell my car. Manager said, cool, absolutely no problem. Guy took his $200, went overseas. 3 months later, he walked into the bank, paid $240, and he left. Manager called him back and he said, listen, what was all that about? Guy said, where else could I get parking for 3 months for $40? Now, the question is that Genevas das? On the one hand, it was total deception. On the other hand, he paid money, he left security, and he paid his interest, right? He paid the, that's an interesting question. I'm not going to answer that question. I want you to think about it. Someone asked Razilberstein that question some time ago. And the question is that called Genevas das? But that kind of problem, if you told that problem to the man on the street mugging people, he wouldn't see the problem. He'd think that's obvious. He wouldn't see the problem because he's not operating on that level of spiritual refinement. And you, all of Rabbi Hill's students, I'm sure you're on a supernal level. Do you know what a supernal level means? That any word you say has a Jewish standard. Do you know that every single word you say needs to be completely true, completely kind, and completely necessary? Please raise your hand if every word that you've ever said is completely true, completely kind, and completely necessary. That is the, Yana, why do you think it's embarrassing to the bank manager? I think the bank manager would think it's pretty cool. That's what I would say. I would give the guy, I'd tell him that's cool beans. Anyway, the point is that you judged where you're operating, and therefore you stressed against your own lower self at your level. And if you want to judge yourself and know how spiritual you are, you have to know where you're operating. When you walk around telling me I'm a very moral person, I don't steal from banks and so forth, no, that's irrelevant. If you're a person operating on a level where every word should be considered, that's you. You better be judged at that level. Okay? And therefore, do not look down on other people because you don't know what they're dealing with. You know, we like to judge people in a way that suits us. You know, we like to look at people who are very rich and envy them. And we like to look at people who are morally inferior to us and feel superior. That's exactly wrong. You should look at people who are poorer than you and feel blessed, and look at people who are morally superior and envy them. But that comparison doesn't suit you. So you choose the comparison that makes you feel good. But that is requiring an understanding of Nekudat HaBechira. Now, the next point we need to understand is this. The point of free will is not static. As you make choices, it moves. Right? For example, if you make a correct moral judgment, you become a better person. And then God sends you a more difficult test. And if you get that right, he sends you a more difficult test, but you're a more mighty warrior. Please raise your hand if you play tennis. Okay, if you play tennis, tennis is meaningful only against an opponent who's more or less on your level. That's called tennis. Let's say you're a good club player. You're one of the best players in your club. One day you walk out onto the tennis court and you find you've been challenged by a 3-year-old. Kid walks on with his racket and his diaper. Okay, now let's say, you win the match. Is that relevant? No. Your name goes up on the board, but it's totally irrelevant. On the other hand, let's say you play the world champion, and during the entire match, you never see the ball once. Would you go home and tell your mum that you lost? No, you didn't lose. You didn't play. That's not called tennis. Tennis is relevant only. Am I making sense? Tennis is relevant only against somebody that's a challenge to you. When you overcome a moral ordeal or a sport is above somebody who's way below you, there's no exertion, there's no reward, there's no growth. And when you lose to somebody way superior to you, that's not a defeat. You're not operating on that level. If you play the world grandmaster chess champion, okay, and he gives you checkmate in 3 moves and you didn't even see what happened, you didn't lose. You weren't in the game. And therefore, to know how you're doing morally, you need to know where your opponent is. And my friends, if you win that tennis game and you beat him, then you've got to play the best people in your club. When you can beat them, you play the other club champions. When you can beat them, you have to play the national champions. When you can beat them, you have to play internationally. And the battle remains as difficult. It doesn't get easier and it doesn't get harder. Because as you elevate yourself and you start grappling at a higher level, Hashem sends you more mighty opponents, but you're a more mighty warrior. The battle remains equal. You never outgrow free will. If you made a free will choice and you strengthened your free will muscle, when you go to the gym, you pick up weights. Now you build muscle. Then tomorrow the weights are easier. No, tomorrow you've got to pick up heavier weights. And as you build more muscle, you're picking up more weights. And that's why great righteous people are dealing with moral ordeals that are much more difficult than yours. Much more difficult. A great rabbi, a great saint, a great spiritual genius, a woman of tremendous spiritual power. Those people are dealing with things that the future of the world depends on. And when they make an error, it's an error at the level of cosmic importance. And the battle is mighty and the stakes are incredible, but they're mighty warriors. And that's why the dark side, listen carefully, that's why the dark side attacks the best people in the world more than the worst people in the world. Because the worst people in the world are in the gutter anyway, it doesn't bother with them. The dark side attacks the greatest and the most spiritual of people. When King David is attacked by the dark side, that's big stakes. When King David sees a woman, right, and he conceives a desire for that woman, and he makes a mistake, you know what the stakes are? You know that woman was? Bathsheba. She becomes the mother of the Mashiach in that relationship with David. Not bad for a mistake. And yet there was something wrong. What was wrong? Very hard to tell. She was destined for him. According to Kabbalah, David's name is Bathsheba. From then the Mashiach was born. You think David looked across the rooftops and he saw a woman bathing and he was attracted by the vulgarity of the back page of the Sunday Times? That wasn't attract King David. What he saw was the Mashiach coming out of them. That's high stakes. And for that, but the battle is a battle at his level. Okay? And therefore, you never judge someone unless you know the level that they're operating at. Because that is the battle of free will. And the battle of free will is dynamic. As you make a correct choice, you get stronger. Then you get more a difficult test. Rabbi Dessler gives the most memorable analogy. He says the battle of free will is like two countries who are at war. The battle takes place on the front line. On the front line, all the conflict is being felt. Let's say one army advances into enemy territory. What was yesterday the battleground is no longer a battlefield. There's no battle there anymore. It's been conquered. Once you elevate, the pain and conflict is only felt at the point of conflict. Once you overcome, my friends, when you're 25 years old and 35 years old, you're not battling the things you were battling when you were 14 and 15 years old. If you are, you're in a very bad way. If you're 35 years old and 45 years old, and you're still tempted by the things you were tempted when you were a teenager, you've made no progress in life. Okay? When you're 15 years old, you're tempted by things that are very childish and very vulgar. And as you become more sophisticated, more mature, you should be tempted, immensely tempted, but by much higher things. And the battle is always a battle, but you're elevating yourself in more sophisticated and more sophisticated layers as you are growing. Okay. Are we clear on this point called Nekudas HaBechira? Okay, let's take the next step. The next step is, why is your point of freedom where it is? Why is that person on the street mugging people and grappling with that ordeal, and you grappling with a private phone call at work or an extra kind word when your wife or your husband needs it and you're under stress? Why? And the answer is, it may not be your fault. Listen carefully, this is a key. And this is all completely against modern psychological teaching and modern criminology and modern psychology and psychiatry and sociology, okay? Completely against the conventional teaching. So it's very important to understand. Why is that person grappling with mugging people on the street? And why are you grappling with the moral choices that you're grappling with? And the answer is, it might not be his fault. Whose fault is it? Maybe his parents, grandparents, government, social norms and cultures, internet, God. So listen carefully. What can you blame God for in your life? And what can you blame you for? And the answer is, you can blame God for putting you in your moral situation, but you can't blame God for the choices you make in your situation. Let me explain. Let's say you have a person who's raised in criminal circumstances. He's raised in criminal circumstances. His parents beat him and abuse him and teach him crime. And the person finds himself in a dishonest situation of violence and theft. Is that his fault? No. You know whose fault it is? His parents. And every time he commits a crime at that level, the parents take the rap because they're the ones that caused it. What he's accountable for is the choices he makes in his circumstance. But the fact that he's dealing in that area in life, my friends, this means you are responsible in an enormous and very scary way. Because when you put someone else in a situation, you're accountable for what happens there. Listen, you walk in the morning and your friend walks past you and she really needs a kind word. She's feeling low and vulnerable and you wrapped up in yourself and you don't notice and you walk right past. And because of that, she feels extra vulnerable and gets depressed and starts making bad life decisions. And those bad decisions lead to other ones. And there's a whole trail of destruction. And it's your fault because you're the point of origin. One moment of insensitivity led to a whole sequence of events that's traced to you. You bring a child into the world and you raise your child with moral disadvantages. Dalia, I see you are you a lawyer, Dalia? Or a scientist, yeah, okay. So you are responsible. Let's say you bring your child into the world with terrible moral options. All the things your child does from there on is you. And listen to this. If you raise a child with tremendous spiritual values and the child makes good decisions at that level, it's your credit, not the child's. Listen to this. Here's a family that is a religious family. And in this family, there's a child. And every morning, the child eats a kosher breakfast. Does the child get any reward for that? No. Who gets the reward? Some grandparent who sacrificed mightily in an unfriendly world to raise a family like that. And that parent might not be alive anymore. Listen, let me give you an example. I'll give you two examples. You know, we have a principle that on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur, the books of the living and the dead are opened. Sifrei Chaim, Sifrei Meitim. And all souls are judged. All neshamot are judged every year. According to Kabbalah, there's a very interesting question. Why would Hashem judge the neshamot of dead people? Why would he judge them? A dead person cannot be any different than they were the year before. If a person lived here and they died, the next year Hashem judges them again. The next year, why? Being dead means you coast with the momentum that you built up in life. No mitzvot, no avirot. You can't do any mitzvahs. You can't do right. You cannot do wrong. Why does Hashem need a new judgment of every soul every year? You hear the question? Listen to the answer. It's very scary. The reason a neshama gets judged at the end of the year, different than the beginning of the year while it's been dead, is because during this year, many things have happened in the world that are the results of something they did when they were alive. And now they take in the credit or the debit. Here's a person who lived and they had a child. Then they died, but the child had children and the children had children. And now there's 3,760 great-great-grandchildren. And all that all of them are doing in the world accrues to the credit of the person who began the process, because it wouldn't have happened without them. And that's why when you do a mitzvah, the Ilui Nishmat, right? Like in honor of the someone who's sponsoring our series, for example. So we're doing the shir in honor of a parent or a grandparent. You know what that means? You're only doing the mitzvah in the world because the parent brought you into the world. It wouldn't have happened without them. So it's their credit. And if you do something bad in the world, they take a measure of the punishment because you're only happening in the world because of them. And the only way you break it was you make a free will decision of your own accord. When you do something that your parents taught you, let's say your parents taught you some spiritual or ethical values, and so you automatically continue in that way. Automatically, you get no credit. You're not choosing. The parent gets the credit. Only when you make a choice of your own and you make it yours, you get the credit. Let me give you another example. This is scary, right? Very scary. And by the way, my friends, you should think this way. Do things in the world that will have consequences that go on forever. Because when you die and you leave the world, you'll be going up and up and up. I know of a family many, many years ago in Israel. They saved up $30,000 of their charity money. And they decided, instead of giving it away, they would make a unique effort with their money. The Chavetz Chaim writes that a third of your charity money you should try to lend. Lend all the time, what we call a gemach. Many people should benefit. Listen what they did. At that time in Israel, $30,000 was enough as a deposit for an apartment. So here's what they did. They found a young couple getting married who could not afford a home. They said to this young couple, we are going to present you with $30,000. You'll be able to get a mortgage, you'll buy a home. But this $30,000 is not a gift, it's a loan. But it's a loan with a unique condition. The condition is as the years go by and you earn enough money to pay it back, you don't pay it to us. You find another young couple getting married and you lend it to them with the same condition. And 3 or 4 families have bought homes now on the same money. That's what you call bang for the buck. That's using your head. Because these people may not be alive anymore, but every time that happens, it only happening because of them. So this is the way you need to think, because the consequences of your free will actions in the world are due to you. Let me give you another example. I know a man who's a Hasidic Jew from Brooklyn. I'm telling you a first-hand story. I know this man. His name's Laser Wolf. This man's mother was pregnant in the Warsaw Ghetto just before the Germans killed everybody. She needed to see a doctor. She managed to escape from the ghetto, and she went to see a Polish lady doctor in the old city of Warsaw, a Catholic woman from the old Polish aristocracy. This Catholic lady doctor treated the Jewish patient. When she left the doctor's office, the doctor said to her, if you go back into the Jewish ghetto, do you know what's going to happen to you? The Germans were closing in. She said, yes, I know. She said, listen, come and stay with me. So the lady said to this woman, to the doctor, she said, I cannot leave my husband. She said, bring him as well. She said, but I can't leave my family. She said, bring them as well. The lady went back into the ghetto and told her husband that this Christian doctor was offering to save their lives. The husband said, but I cannot leave my family. So they took them as well. And they arrived at this lady's house with 13 people. One cold morning, she opened the door. There's 13 Jews standing at her door. She quickly took them into the house. She put them in the attic of her home for 22 months. For 22 months, they never left the house, including a time during which the Gestapo occupied the house. And they never knew there were 13 Jews in the attic of the house. And every day she fed them and kept them clean. With her own hands, she carried away their waste every day and made sure they were fed. Amazing stories happen. I'm not going to tell you the whole story, but I want to tell you the end of the story. After 22 months in that attic, she managed to get them across the border into Switzerland, and they all 13 survived, and all 13 of them ended up in New York City. Just over 10 years ago in New York City, there was a wedding of one of the grandchildren of one of those 13 people. And at that wedding in Brooklyn, there were 200 people present, descended from the 13 people that she saved 80 years before. And at that wedding, they went back to Poland and they found her. And they brought her to be present. Old lady, sitting at a wedding in Brooklyn with 200 people dancing around her, children, grandchildren, great-grandchildren of 13 people that she saved. And during the meal, someone walked up to her and said to her, why did you risk your life to save Jews? And she said, because I read the Bible. And I saw in the Bible that when God was about to wipe out the city of Sodom, Abraham negotiated with God. And he said, God, if you can find 50 righteous people, you save the city, 45 righteous people. And she said, I was hoping that there'd be enough of us to save Poland. And I was wrong. Now, she died about 3 years ago, by the way, this lady, okay? Now that is an action that she did That has consequences. 200 people. And now the 200 people have children, and they have children, and they're all her children. Because she made a free will decision that had consequences in the world. That's what you call bang for the buck. Okay? And it goes on and on and on till the Mashiach comes. Those are going to be her children. Okay? So listen carefully to this. Your point of freedom in the world is set by other people. And therefore, when you find yourself as a disadvantaged child, you've got learning difficulties, you've got emotional problems, you've got ADHD, and you've got OCD, and whose fault is that? Your mother's fault, your father's fault. It's God's fault. But you cannot blame your mother or your father or God for the choices you make in your situation. God only expects you to make the choices that are the best possible in your situation. And therefore, when children today say, it's not my fault, I got ADD. My friend, ADD is not your fault, but how you're handling it, that's your fault. And when you have an addictive personality, or you've got some personality problem, or when you're gifted, and you say, you take credit for the gifts, or you refuse to take responsibility for the, just 1 second, who are you blaming? If you're blaming your parents or your school teachers or God for your situation, right, 100%. But don't blame them for the decisions you make in your situation. That's you. You didn't choose your circumstances. That's true. By the way, I don't know if Rabbi Hill's taught you this. According to Kabbalah, you did choose your circumstances before you come into the world. Now, Rabbi Hill, there's an amazing Torah Samincha, Talmud of the Rashba. If you email me, I'll send it to you. He says, before every neshama is born, God says, what would you like in the world? Do you want to be a tendency to righteousness or to evil? Which would you like you to grapple with? Do you want riches or poverty? Which test would you like? And you choose all the circumstances, and he puts you into the world with exactly, he says, if you choose to be righteous and have enough money and all the advantages, your job is easy in the world, and then God gives you less credit, less reward. If you choose difficult circumstances, poverty, and a bad nature, and so on and so forth, he gives you a much more difficult job, but then he gives you much more reward. And he says to every neshama before you're born, which combination would you like? And you're born into the world with the ordeals that you've chosen for yourself. Anyway, that's another level, which takes another discussion. Now, that is the teaching. That is the teaching about the point of free will. Let me add just one more dimension. Obviously, there's tremendous amount to say here, but I'd like to add one more insight, if I may. We live in a world that does not agree with what I'm saying. The tendency today is to say it's not your fault at all. You don't have free choice. Your choices are conditioned by your genes and your chemistry and your parents, okay? And the tension here is, but on the one hand, we are conditioned by our genes and our parents. So where's the balance exactly? I'd like to give you 2 examples, and I hope this will make it plain for you. Example number 1. I have a friend who's a psychiatrist. Some time ago, he told me, I'm dealing with a 21-year-old Jewish patient. She's a young girl of 21. And here's the psychological problem that I'd like to discuss. I said to him, why do you want to discuss it with me? I'm a doctor, but I'm not a psychiatrist. He said, here's the situation. 21-year-old Jewish girl, she has a tremendous temptation to steal candy in the supermarket. That's her temptation. She's a rich girl. Her house is full of sweets. She can afford whatever she wants. She has a compulsion. It's called kleptomania. Okay? She walks into the supermarket. She sees the sweets. Tremendous temptation to take them. What's the problem? She's now in court for the 10th time. And the judge is asking him to testify about her sanity. He's a doctor. If he tells the judge that she's legally insane, she'll go for psychiatric treatment. If he tells the judge that she's legally sane, she's going to go to jail because this is a 10th offense, okay? And the judge is going to think about putting her in jail. And my friend says, what am I supposed to tell the judge? I can't say she's insane. This is not insanity. Legal insanity means you're not in contact with reality. She knows what she's doing. She knows it's wrong. She comes for therapy. She usually controls herself. Now, my friends, listen carefully to this. Which side will you take in that discussion? If you say the girl's not accountable because she's got kleptomania, then who's accountable for anything? If you see me with one of my problems, I mean, I don't steal sweets in the supermarket, but I have my own issues. I don't know. Let's say chocolate cake. If you see me with chocolate cake and you say, Tatz, listen, why are you out of control with chocolate cake? I say, you don't understand my compulsions. It's not me, it's my genes. If you say that, well, then who's accountable for anything? Any criminal can tell the court, listen, I have an addictive personality. I got kleptomania. I got psychological coercions. And if you say, gee, that can't be right, she's 100% accountable and she's fully responsible for her deeds. And a kleptomania is irrelevant. Obviously, that's wrong. None of you in this webinar steal sweets in the supermarket. You know why? You don't have kleptomania. Ladies and gentlemen, what I'm suggesting to you is there's a tremendously difficult dilemma here. Does Judaism accept that you have psychological, genetic, chemical, behavioral, sociological forces operating on you, or doesn't it? If Judaism accepts that you have those pressures, then forget about responsibility. It's not you, it's your genes and your chemistry. And how can you deny that those things are real? Anybody knows those things are real. Do you see the problem? Dalia, see the problem? Let me give you another example. Maybe this will make it more plain. Some years ago, a young girl was jogging through Central Park in New York City. 5 or 6 young men from the Harlem ghetto, this was a very famous case in America. 5 or 6 young men attacked her. They almost killed her. They broke every bone in her body, but they never stole anything. When the police arrested these 5 young men, they told the police they did it for fun. It was a Sunday afternoon. They had nothing else to do, so they beat up the girl. Okay. The case came to trial in New York, and it caused a national uproar because the lawyers for the defense argued that the reason that these young men did that was because they were raised in the Harlem ghetto. They were so beaten and abandoned and brutalized and poverty-stricken with no education and no role models, and so abused themselves that what they did was they're not responsible for. In fact, technically what happened, the lawyers tried to invalidate the jury. They said, you cannot sit as a middle-class white on a jury because you cannot relate to their sociological situation. Now listen carefully. Here's the Jewish question. Do we say that they're not accountable because they were raised in violent circumstances? Then no criminals accountable for what they do because of their circumstances. Or do we say the circumstances are irrelevant, they're 100% guilty for beating up the girl? But 1 second, they were raised in violent circumstances. The reason that you, Dalia, don't hang out in the park on a Sunday afternoon beating up people with a piece of lead piping is because you weren't raised in those circumstances. So my friends, we have a very difficult moral question. Does Judaism accept that psychological, chemical, genetic, social influences are real or not? If you say they're real, forget about responsibility and legal responsibility. And how can you say they're not relevant? Obviously they're relevant. Do we share the problem? Okay, listen to the answer, because it's very important to understand this. Very important. What you're dealing with is not your fault. When the girl walks into the supermarket and sees the candy and she wants to take it and she has a compulsion, that's not her fault. That's kleptomania. It's genetic, it's chemical, whatever it is. But when she takes the sweet, she's guilty. When she succeeds or fails, that's her. When I walk into the supermarket, I'm not tempted to take the sweets in the first place. When I walk out without the sweets, I get no reward. When she walks out without the sweets, she gets big time reward. And if I steal the sweets in the supermarket, I get big time punishment. And she gets very small punishment because it was very difficult for her. Young man standing in the park. The girl jogs through the park. One guy says to the other one, hey, dude, or whatever they say in Harlem, let's go beat up that girl. Other guy says, yeah, man. Is that their fault? No. When you're raised in those circumstances, that's the way you think. That's what it is to be macho and to function in that society. It's not their fault. But when they walk over and beat her up, knowing they wouldn't like to have their own bones broken, they're guilty. What you do in your situation of temptation, you're guilty for, provided you could have done different, obviously. There's red lines where you have no free will at all. Is this, are we making sense, my friends, ladies, gentlemen? Okay. And therefore, the message is, you want to judge people? Look at their circumstances. They may not be accountable for their circumstances. They may be. They may have chosen those circumstances. They may have sunk into those circumstances through bad choices. They may raise themselves to those circumstances through right choices. It's a combination of their own merit and their parents and their genes and their society. You didn't choose to be born Jewish. You didn't choose to be born male or female. You didn't choose to be born with a certain refinement of character and personality and looks and intelligence and money and family. You didn't choose that. Others chose that for you, your parents, your grandparents, God, society. So where you find yourself in the 21st century with your particular gifts and your particular difficulties, blame God, but don't blame him for how you use those circumstances. A well-adjusted person knows that God put me in the situation, that's the right one for me. God made me a problematic mother and a mother-in-law who rides a broom at midnight. You know, how do you deal with it? Do you find a nice place for her to park a broom when she visits? You know, how do you deal with the problem? That's up to you. And therefore, this is the doctrine of the point of free will. Okay, we run out of time. If Rabbi Hill wants to take a couple of questions, I'm very happy to try to do that. Is there a book that deals with the downside of modern psychology? There are very few books that deal with Torah psychology correctly. Maybe Rabbi Hill can help on this. I don't know a specific book that deals with the correct. I think the best option, maybe Rabbi Hill will agree with me, probably the best way of accessing that material is what we call the Kelm School of Musa, which is the way of analyzing the inner motivations and the inner psychological mechanisms. And the classic work in that field is Rabbi Dessler's work, which is known as Michtav Meliyahu. And in that book, he goes through the classic analysis of psychological motivations, subconscious motivations, becoming aware of one's biases and prejudices. What is the lower self when it masquerades as the higher self? That's probably the place to begin in this field, I would say.
First of all, thank you so much, Rabbi Tatz. Huge thank you. I have a chance for questions in a minute. One of the advantages that I'm in charge of who's muted or not, I can ask the first question. So I'm super excited. So I might as well take advantage of that. It's actually a question I asked Rabbi Tatz probably about 16 years ago on a Shabbos in Sussex, but maybe I'm now of the maturity to understand the answer, which I didn't understand at the time. So I'll try again. The Talmud says there's a principle called Oines Rachmana Potre, which means if someone is almost forced, is under compulsion, then they're exempt. So the case of the schizophrenia, why isn't that a case of onus being unavoidable? And moreover, let's say that case, there is still a potentiality for some choice. Surely there must be some psychological conditions like schizophrenia, for example, or like severe depression. In the past, since I've asked that question, a few of my friends have passed away with suicide. And is there as Rabbi Tatz called it, a red line where actually it wasn't your free will and it was almost Hashem's will, where the consequences of that trauma is almost for the other people in the world to have the challenges with? That's my question.
Yes, of course, that is quite correct. So the principle is like this. There's no place in the contract where it states that you have free will in all circumstances. God doesn't give you free will in all circumstances. There's a zone of free will. If you're a child, you have no free will, no legal responsibility at all under bar mitzvah. If you are under duress with gunpoint, you may have no free will either. And in fact, a Jewish court would not be able to, if somebody puts a gun to your head and says, kill someone or I'll kill you, it's forbidden. You may not kill the person. But if you do, the Rambam says you're not judged for it because the pressure was too great. Okay? So when a person has duress beyond human capacity to resist, there's no responsibility. That includes temporal epilepsy and certain psychotic situations. Absolutely not. And therefore, there's a red line. So let's put Rabbi Hill's principle in graphics. There's a lower red line and an upper red line. The lower red line means below that, there's no option to choose correctly. You have no choice. And there's no legal, and by the way, not only no moral responsibility, any court of law, Jewish or otherwise, will not hold you accountable either, because they recognize that there was no free will. At the top end, you could have no free will either. The famous commentary called the Meshech Chochmah says that Moshe Rabbeinu, lost his free will. He practiced morality and spirituality to such a degree that he blew out the top, to a point where he could no longer choose wrong. Of course, when you get to that level, I'd like you to contact me and let me know. But if you get to a level, he lost his free will. He raised himself to a level where he could no longer choose. Of course, he gets the credit for that because he put himself into that situation. You could put yourself into an addiction and make the addiction worse and worse and worse until you have no free will. Absolutely. Are your actions there accountable? No. Are you accountable for putting yourself there? Yes. And therefore, there are two red lines. Now, a court may have difficulty judging where the red line is. That's a technical problem. You may have difficulty knowing, right, whether you have. I'll give you a very brutal test. Rabbi Hill, your question was once put to Rabbi Moshe Shapiro like this. A person is addicted. Let's say smoking, whatever it is. And they claim they no longer have any free will. They take that cigarette and they say, I've been smoking for so long and I'm so addicted that taking another cigarette is not in my free will. To make the test, ask yourself like this. If you smoke that cigarette, as you smoke it, your child dies. As you smoke that cigarette, your child dies. Will you smoke the cigarette? If yes, you have no free will. If no, you have free will. That's a very brutal test. Okay, but yeah, you want to prove. In other words, don't tell me because the test is very difficult for you, you have no free will. I've seen people resist heroin, never mind cigarettes, and almost die in the process. You have free will. Is there ever a point beyond free will? Yes. Where's that point? I don't know. But I'll tell you what's more interesting, and maybe we'll finish with this. Around the red line is a gray zone where it's not easy to know. And that's a question of wise judgment, rabbinic judgment, legal judgment. I'll give you an example that makes it very plain. I heard this from Rav Zilberstein, the son-in-law of one of the great rabbis of the previous generation, Rabbi Elyashiv. This is the story that he told. A 13-year-old boy with Down syndrome. You all know what Down syndrome is? He went into the great rabbi one day in Jerusalem, Rabbi Elyashiv, and he said, Rabbi, I've come to ask you to tell my father to let me have a bar mitzvah. I want to read the Torah like every Jewish boy. My father says I'm not normal. I'm not allowed to read the Torah. I'm capable of reading the Torah. Why can't I have a bar mitzvah? Rabbi Elyashiv said to the boy, how did you get here? The child said, I took a 33 bus in Bnei Brak to the main bus station. From there, I took a number 1 to Jerusalem. And in Jerusalem, I took a 23 bus to see you. Rabbi Elyashiv said, tell your father that's good enough. In other words, I don't know if you would allow that child to be a witness in a Jewish court, but to read the Torah for the community, yes, it's a question of judgment. So around the gray zone, like in all of Judaism and in all of law, the gray zone requires judgment. But what we discussed in this session today was the principle. The principle is within the boundaries, you have free will. At the top end, very difficult. At the bottom end, very difficult from the opposite perspective. And then there's below the free will and above the free will completely, absolutely. When a person commits suicide, Rabbi Hill, there are two possibilities. Either they made a moral failure and they will be judged in the next world for taking a life, or they were under such duress and such psychological pressure that they lost contact with reality. Do we know which one it was? We always make a default assumption that it was the latter. And that's why when people commit suicide today, we bury them normally, we mourn them normally. We reason that to do such an extreme thing, they must have lost contact. They must have been under such pain or such psychological imbalance. We give the benefit of the doubt, okay? We don't do that in a murder case because there's a law and there's reasons that the law needs to be applied. Of course, in a murder case, if the person can prove that they were under such situation psychologically, then they will be exempt in a court of law as well. Let me finish with this, if I may. For those lawyers among you, here's an extreme example which Judaism agrees with. In British and American law, there's a thing called the Mcnaughton Rules. Mcnaughton Rules are like this, that if somebody commits a crime in law, for example, let's say they murder somebody, and they claim that they're psychologically problematic and they heard voices telling them to kill the person. So here's this person, they killed somebody, and they say they did it because their voices told them. And the psychiatrist testifies that they were hearing voices. Do you know that in Jewish law and in British and American law, you can be convicted of murder in those circumstances, even though you were psychotic and you heard voices? You know why? The court says to you, why did you listen to the voices? Why did you listen to the voices? If you claim that a human being told you to do it, that's no excuse. So when you claim that your voices told you, that's no excuse. Now, if you claim that you thought they were trying to kill you, that's different. That's a hallucination of self-defense. That's different. But if you hallucinate that voices are telling you, that's not good enough. There was still a moral choice. Okay. Anyway, Rabbi Hill, thank you very much for this opportunity.